Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare. So it seems like this is it's a good way for me to practice Krishna consciousness. Just have minimal association with others, simply because I get distracted so easily. So if I minimize my interactions with others, I can focus on the chanting, focus on Krishna, chanting and hearing. It seems to be a very, for me, practical way to practice, to minimize my involvement with others. Definitely no management. Forget it. That's for somebody else. No question of that. No question of that. Forget it. It's out. But I can focus on hearing and chanting, and more hearing and more chanting. And that way, I can fix my mind on Krishna. Because I just get so distracted by everyone's everything. I get distracted. So, old woman, can't do anything anyway. Getting up in the morning is, wow, that's a major event, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Hare. So, a couple minutes before the top of the hour. Prabhupada, Kṛṣṇa book. And this is Lord Brahmā. His beautiful prayers. And he's not happy with his exalted position. He'd rather be a blade of grass, not even in Vrindavan, but outside Vrindavan, on the edge, so that when the residents of Vrindavan, who have this loving, intimate relationship with Krishna, they don't even think of him as God or the supreme this or the supreme that. They just love it. Spontaneous emotions. Oh, here comes an interruption. Okay. So he wants to be a blade of grass. So when they take a walk outside Vrindavan, he'll get the dust of their feet. Automatic monitoring system. It'll stop after a few seconds. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. I can't disconnect it. It has to do its thing. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And there's the cuckoo. Hare Go ahead, fix your mind on Krishna and Kali Yuga. Hare Krishna. Krishna. But if somehow everything's connected to Krishna, then even if it's a little distantly connected, it'll work. So, so he prays to be a blade of grass. He says, if I am not so fortunate to take birth within the forest of Vrindavan, I beg to be allowed to take birth outside the immediate area of Vrindavan, so that when the devotees go out, they will walk over me. Even that would be a great fortune for me. I'm just aspiring for a birth in which I will be smeared by the dust of the devotees' feet. I can see that everyone here is simply full of Krishna consciousness. They do not know anything but Mukunda. All the Vedas are indeed searching after the lotus feet of Krishna. It is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita that the purpose of Vedic knowledge is to find Krishna. It is said in Brahmā Samhita that it is very difficult to find Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by systematic reading of the Vedic literature. But he's very easily available through the mercy of a pure devotee. The pure devotees of Vrindavan are fortunate because they can see Mukunda, Lord Krishna, all the time. The word Mukunda can be understood in two ways. Muk means liberation. Lord Krishna can give liberation and therefore transcendental bliss. The word also refers to his smiling face, which is just like the Kunda flower. Mukha also means face. The Kunda flower is very beautiful, and it appears to be smiling. Thus, the comparison is made. The difference between the pure devotees of Vrindavan and other devotees is that the residents of Vrindavan have no other desire but to associate with Krishna. Krishna, being very kind to his devotees, fulfills their desires because they always want Krishna's association. The Lord is always prepared to give it to them. The devotees of Vrindavan are also spontaneous lovers. They do not follow the regulative principles. They are not required to strictly follow regulative principles because they are already naturally developed in transcendental love for Krishna. Regulative principles are required for persons who have not achieved the position of transcendental love. Brahmā is also a devotee of the Lord, but he is subject to follow regulative principles. He prays to Krishna to give him the chance to take birth in Vrindavan so that he might be elevated to the platform of spontaneous love. They are not required to strictly follow regulative principles. They are not required to strictly follow regulative principles. Regulative principles are for persons who have not achieved the position of transcendental love. How to understand that for those who are not on the platform of spontaneous devotional love for Krishna can be a little tricky. It can be a little tricky. What are regulative principles? What regulative principles are being discussed here? Now, there's regulative principles of devotional service. and there are regulative principles that bring one to a human platform. So the question arises, are they talking about the regulative principles that bring someone to the human platform? Like no meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, and no gambling. Are those the regulative principles that a pure devotee is not required to follow? Or is it the regulative principles, there are many of them, things like rising early, chanting a certain number of rounds, regulative principles of devotional service, which I believe the first part of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu goes into a great deal about how to practice devotional service under regulative principles. And that's the first part of Nectar of Devotion, involving how to approach the deity, how to bow down, how to do this, how to do that, how to regulative principles of Vaidhi Bhakti devotional service. So it's a little tricky for those who aren't on the platform of ecstatic, spontaneous, loving, devotional service in relationship with Kṛṣṇa, personality of Godhead, in Vrindavan. When they hear that, it can be a little tricky. What devotional, what regulative principles are they not required to follow? You go out and have a hamburger and everything's okay? For the most part, they wouldn't be inclined to. You go out and just have a bunch of illicit sex, just whoopee. For the most part, they wouldn't be inclined to. Because there's a set of rules. It's really the only regulative principle. And it's to accept everything favorable for Krishna consciousness and reject everything unfavorable. And something that entangles someone in material sense gratification is not favorable for Krishna consciousness. So they wouldn't be inclined to just go out and have a whole bunch of illicit sex. So they wouldn't be inclined to go out and eat a bunch of dead bodies with sauce on it. They wouldn't be inclined to, for the most part. Certainly wouldn't be inclined to speculate or to gamble about Krishna because they're in a relationship with Krishna. So or to take intoxication because that clouds the consciousness and you can't find Krishna. So they wouldn't be inclined naturally to indulge in those kinds of activities. And they just bring person up to the civilized human life anyway. So that's that question. What regulative principles are they not strictly following? What brings to mind is Madhavendra Puri's prayer, where he says, "Goodbye, my morning bath. Goodbye, my religious practices. Goodbye this, goodbye that. Goodbye, my austerities. Goodbye. I'll see you all later," because I think simply being absorbed in full consciousness, in ecstatic love of Krishna, is enough for me. So that's what comes to my mind when I hear they don't follow regulative principles, is they're not doing austerities, they're simply absorbed in a loving, ecstatic relationship with Krishna, Vrindavan Krishna. Not to be imitated. Even Lord Brahmā prays, that is such an exalted position of those devotees. I pray to take birth as a blade of grass so that when they go for a walk outside of Vrindavan, they'll step on me and I'll get some dust. So, accept everything favorable, reject everything unfavorable. Right now, this is favorable. Hare, chanting and hearing, and more chanting and more hearing, conquering the mind, fixing on Kṛṣṇa. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.